This particular section is on independent and dependent events. We constantly have to look at the events of the probability and see, does the first event affect the second event? So that's what we're going to have to judge as we continue to look at these problems. If the first event affects the second event, then we say it's a dependent probability. If the first event does not affect the second event, then we say it's independent, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. Independent events. Events in which the outcome of one event does not affect the probability of another event. So let's look at several examples of independent events. Example number 1. Say I had a spinner and I took one spin of the spinner, and then right after that spin, I spinned it again. We know that the second spin has nothing to do with the first spin. So that's an example of an independent event. Suppose I rolled some dice. Well, irregardless of whatever the first die landed on, we know that the second die will land on whatever number it's going to land on. It doesn't have anything to do with whatever the first die landed on. So therefore, those are two separate events. So that's another example of independent events. Example number 3. Suppose I rolled a die and I picked a card out of a deck. Well, if I rolled a die and it landed on 2, that has nothing to do with me reaching into a deck of cards and pulling out a card. So once again, those are separate events. They have nothing to do with one another. Suppose I picked a marble out of a bag. Now, if I picked a marble out of the bag, in order for this to be an independent event, if I was to reach my hand in there and grab a second marble, the only way that this could be an independent event is if after I grab the first marble, I put it back into the bag. Now, nothing has changed in the problem. So therefore, when I reach my hand in there and grab it again, it's just like I'm grabbing a marble for the first time. So therefore, that's an example of an independent event. It's only independent if I put the marble back into the bag before my second grab. Once again, picking a card out of a deck of cards. In order for this to be an independent event, if I wanted to grab a second card from the deck, I would have to put the card that I pulled the first time back into the deck before I pulled the second card. Then it would be an independent event. Dependent events. Events in which the outcome of one event affects the probability of the other event. So let's just look at 3 examples of that. First example, suppose I had 10 socks, 5 black and 5 white socks. And I ask you, what's the probability of you pulling 2 black socks out the drawer? Well, if I reach in there and I grab a sock, regardless of whether it's black or white, now pull a sock, and I keep it in my hand and I reach in there and I grab another sock. Now, because I did not replace the first sock that I took out, I am now dealing with 9 socks instead of 10. And I'm also dealing with 1 less color of whatever sock I pulled out. So because of that, I've now just changed the probability of my second event. So therefore, we say that the second event depends on the first event. It depends on what happened. Did I pull a black sock or a white sock out of the first one? Same thing with a deck of cards. If I have a deck of cards and I grab a card and I want to know the probability of what card I will get for the second one, If I don't replace that first card that I took out, and that's the key word, I am not replacing the card. And because I did not replace the card, I'm dealing with less cards, so therefore my probability has changed. And once again, in the case of marbles, if I reach in my hand in there and take out a marble out of a bag, if I do not replace it, once again, I'm dealing with less marbles, so therefore my probability has changed. So these are the things that we're talking about when we talk about independent and dependent events. Independent, the first event and the second event have nothing to do with each other. It's either because I'm replacing what I took out in the first event, or they just are completely different things. Dependent, what I do in the first event directly affects what happens in the second event. And if it does, then we say it's a dependent event.